Hello YouTubers, welcome to AP Vocabulary. This is a little bit more on Russia. This is going to be 4 new words, all of them pretty closely related. We're going to look at Peter the Great and St. Petersburg, his new capital city, and then we'll look at Catherine the Great and the Pugachev rebellion, which was put down by Catherine the Great. So let's start with Peter the Great. So Peter the Great was a Romanov, and this was the new Russian family that had been chosen. It's a noble family, the Romanovs, had been chosen as the new leaders, the new czars of Russia after the time of troubles brought on by Ivan the Terrible. So Peter the Great was extremely tall, and he was a Russian czar, and he was an absolute monarch. He ruled with absolute authority in Russia, was keenly interested in developments of the West, but was not interested in really any of the political developments. He advanced the Russian military, built a navy, he moved the capital city further to the west, was very intent on trying to change the culture of Russia to be a little more Western, but was not keen on changing to involve any of the Enlightenment ideas that were happening in Europe at the time. So Peter the Great was significant for his autocratic rule and kind of his real grip on authority in Russia, which is pretty consistent with the character of the czars at the time. So St. Petersburg was the capital city that Peter the Great moved from Moscow to St. Petersburg. It was on the Baltic, which was normally kind of an ice-choked body of water, but Peter the Great moved the capital to the west in order to create a new capital city in the image of the West that he wanted. So it was very Western styled. It was actually modeled on Venice, and it kind of went to show his degree of fascination and adoration for the West. So it was also, the canals were dug with serf labor, aka slave labor, and that really showed also his control over the serfs and his lack of regard for doing anything to help the peasant situation in Russia. Incidentally, Peter the Great was not greatly loved by the noble class in Russia, the boyars, because of his heavy-handedness and his, he kind of forced them to do what he wanted them to do without negotiating with them as equals like they would have liked. All right, Catherine the Great. A couple generations after Peter the Great, Catherine the Great took power, and she was a non-Russian czarina, so she was a female czar who took power when her husband Peter III died. She was a German noble who was married to Peter III, and so when she came to Russia, came to love Russia, and also, like Peter the Great, attempted to westernize Russia, but she was a selective westernizer. So she was not terribly interested in changing the autocracy to the absolute monarchy that she enjoyed the power of, but she was interested in at least entertaining ideas of the Enlightenment, and she was very fascinated with these Enlightenment thinkers from France during her time. She reigned actually after the 1750s, so from the 1760s to the 1790s, and reigned for a very long time and did very little to progress the problems of serfdom in Russia, but did some to alleviate the hatred of the nobles towards the Tsar, because she pleased the nobles much more than Peter the Great did. And that brings up the kind of the last word, which is the Pugachev rebellion. The Pugachev rebellion was kind of in the interim time period between Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. There was a succession of weak leaders, and one of the peasants who grew bold during this time was Pugachev, and Pugachev was fighting to advance peasant rights, just the rights of the average working person in Russia. Felt that basically the rule was a little too heavy-handed, and the Pugachev rebellion was put down very violently. Pugachev himself was slaughtered essentially in a public square, and served as an example to peasants, to serfs, to the lower classes in Russia, that they didn't have rights, and their ability to speak and to negotiate with the noble classes was severely limited. So that was the significance of the Pugachev rebellion. Had to do with Catherine the Great, because she was the Tsarina in charge during that time. So there's your 4 words, the last 4 of the chapter. I apologize for getting them up so late, but it's been kind of a crazy day. You can probably hear Bob the Builder in the background while I should be having my kid in bed right now. So be awesome, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And that's all I got.